Greetings once again. It is late, 9:40. Sales gonna start at 9:45. I'm 5 minutes early. Welcome back again. This is Amuna Yisrael. This is the Lev Project, Solonomics 101, dealing with, we haven't seen this in a few weeks. 30 Years a Slave from Bondage to Freedom by Lewis Hughes. March was just really, a crazy kind of month. I actually started this and then I realized that it was Women's History Month. And so then I doubled up, if you've been paying attention, with the narratives from the other book, with the shorter narratives. We was in the wheat. Sorry, it's late. I've been running all day but and then they had the Underground series that started in March. So it was like a lot of stuff. And so we had to put down Lewis Hughes for a few weeks. It's not that we weren't doing the Left Project. We just weren't doing this particular book. And we are going to continue on intermittently with the narratives from Weevils in the Wheat. And then we're going to still do our full length. So no rush. It's a marathon. We taking our time. And as long as we're getting the information. So for those who haven't seen, I see a lot of shout out to all the people who are looking at the Underground review, and prayerfully you are watching the Underground yourself and doing your own review. And so that's just been interesting. You're just watching to see, which way it's going. Is it lining up with some of these narratives that we're reading? What ways it is, what ways it isn't. And prayerfully, it's not just for entertainment. It's for education and understanding of the experience of what it would look like and sound like and feel like. And I have an awesome project. I can't even start it now because you have to be like, Amuna, yeah, that's way too much. But I'm finishing up a project. So for those who've been tuning in, thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. I'm working on an online course. It's Solonomics. It's from the well, I don't have it right here. It's from the book Solonomics that's supposed to be coming out. Well, this is the old cover. It's because coming out soon. This is the old cover. I redid the cover. It's a little bit different, but And so this is about, once we find out all of the things, all of the epigenetics, all of the issues that we may have going on within us. I haven't released it yet. I'm going to release it soon, but I wanted to kind of finish the course so that it could accompany the book and it can help. I wrote a book years ago. It was kind of like a guided journal, and everybody kept telling me, "Oh, it's too hard. It's too much. They needed more direction, more hands-on." And that was 2010. So we in 2006, let's say 6 years ago. So, and that was just prompting. It was a 12-step guide to self-examination and purification. That one is also on Amazon, Bar Midbar. And it was kind of left it up to the individual. But I have yet to see a person and it was such a small, it's a small book. But people say, man, and when I haven't been able to finish it, because they don't really know where to go with it. So 6 years later, finally, I was able to develop something that's a little more guided, and it's called Solonomics, and hopefully it will be ready soon. That's what I've been working on. Sorry, that's a side note. So I'll definitely let you know when that is in effect. Is there anything else? Let me go ahead and make sure I can see and hear you if you're tuning in. And for everybody who's saying how at first it was rocky when I was doing this, because a lot of people were not trying to hear. I don't want to talk about slavery, but I'm just so thankful for those who faithfully tune in and who also share. And to hear that it is benefiting you, it's a blessing unto the Most High. So for everybody who's saying let me put this on pause. And let's go ahead and get started. It feels like a long time, but it hasn't been because we've been still talking, but we haven't been talking on this. So let's continue. We're reading 30 Years a Slave from Bondage to Freedom, the institution of slavery as seen on the plantation and in the home of planter, autobiography of Lewis Hughes. So far, if we don't remember, we got up to the third portion. So this is the fourth portion. And what we liked about him so far is the way he categorizes everything. He puts them in these neat little boxes, so to say, of his experiments on different things. So we're up to a shocking accident. It says, not long not long after Mrs. Farrington had made her first visit to our house, she came there to live. Celia had been acting as her maid. When Mrs. Farrington had been up some months, it was decided that all the family should go down to old Master Jack's for a visit. If you remember, I know it's been some time, but he moved. His masters, they moved, and they moved into this big, huge house. It's the right story, right? I think, yeah, they moved into this big, huge house of which more work was there for them that they had to do. So it says, the night before the family was to leave, therefore, she was getting ready a garment for herself to wear on the trip, and it was supposed that she sewed until midnight, or after when she fell asleep, letting the goods fall into the candle. All at once, a little after 12, I heard a scream, then a cry of fire, fire, and boss yelling, Louis, Louis. I jumped up, throwing an old coat over me, and ran upstairs in the direction of Mrs. Farrington's room. I encountered boss in the hall, and it was dark and the smoke stifling. I could hardly make any headway. At this moment, Mrs. Farrington threw her door open and screamed for Cousin Eddie, meaning McGee. He hurriedly came to me to get a pitcher of water. Quick, I grasped the pitcher from the stand, and he attempted to throw the water on Celia, who was all in blaze, running around like a madwoman. But the pitcher slipped from his hand and broke. Very little of the water reached her. She was at last wrapped in an old blanket to extinguish the flames, but she was burned too badly to recover. Boss, being a physician, said at once, poor girl, she's burned to death. He did all he could for her, wrapped her in linen sheets and endeavored to relieve her sufferings, but all was of no avail. She had inhaled the flame, injuring her internally, and lived only a few days. So that's wild. And if I'm not, Cecilia, as we read just now, is the maid that had been so hurried in the preparations for this visit that she had done nothing for herself. So Celia falls asleep trying to make her clothes, and the fire blazes up, and she ends up dying as a result of that. That's wild right there. Master's new cotton plantation. Shortly after Boss bought his home in Memphis, he bought a large farm in Bolivar, Mississippi. It was a regular cotton farm on the Mississippi River, embracing 200 acres. The houses built for slaves were framed 18 in number, each to contain 3 or 4 families, and arranged on each side of the street that ran through the farm. Did you hear that the one house, greetings, Sister Angel, welcome, welcome, welcome. Did you hear that the one house was supposed to fit 3 or 4 families? Charles Ball also told us about that, how it was like dormitory. That's what they do to you when you go to school at the dorm. They just throw people up on you. You know, this is what he's saying. 3 to 4 families arranged, supposed to be contained in one house. Okay. And arranged on each side of the street that ran through the farm. The street was all grass over, but there were no sidewalks. All the buildings, the barn, gin house, slave quarters, and overseer's house were whitewashed. And on this grass street, they made a neat and pretty appearance. The house where the boss and the madam stayed when they went down to the farm was about 200 yards from the slave quarters. It was arranged in 2 apartments, one for the overseer and wife, and the other for master and mistress upon the occasion of their visits. This building was separated from the others by a fence. There was what was called the cookhouse, where was cooked all the food for the hands. Aunt Matilda was a cook in charge. Besides the buildings already named, there were stables, a blacksmith shop, sawmill, and the general order arrangement was carried out with the respect to all. The appearance was that of a village. Everything was raised in abundance to last from one crop to the next. Vegetables and meats were provided from the farm, and a dairy of 50 cows furnished all the milk and butter needed. So every plantation was its own kind of self-contained, like he said, village, where it is that everything that you needed, you know, the sawmill, the carpenter, the blacksmith, were on these mini corporations. That's what it was. Plantation corporations. Very interesting. It's kind of like now when you go to corporate America and they'll have the cafeteria downstairs and the gift shop downstairs and all of these things self-contained within, so that you really don't have to go out, I guess. right? The cane brakes were so heavy that it was common for bears to hide there and at night come and carry off hogs. Wolves were plenty in the woods behind the farm and could be heard at any time. The cane was so thick that when they were clearing up new ground, it would have to be set on fire, and the crackling that would ensue was like the continuous explosion of small firecrackers. About 160 slaves, besides children, all owned by McGee, were worked on the farm. Instead of ginning 2 or 3 bales of cotton a day, as at Potomac, they ginned 6 to 7 bales here. So this McGee, he had a lot of human cargo, human manpower that he used for his enterprises. Incidents. I remember well the time when the great Swedish singer Jenny Lind came to Memphis. It was during her famous tour through America in 1851. Our folks were all enthused over her. Boss went in and secured tickets to her concert, and I was summoned to drive them to the hall. It was a great event. People swarmed the streets like bees. So they were having concerts back in 1851 and before. This stuff is not new. The carriages and hacks were stacked back from the hall as far as the eye could see. On another occasion, when the great prodigy Blind Tom came to Memphis, there was a similar stir among the people. Tom was a very young then, and he was called Blind boy. People came from far and near to hear him. Those coming from the villages and small towns who could not get passage on the regular trains came in freight or on flat bottom cars. The tickets were $5 each, as I remember. Boss said it was expensive. Yeah, $5 at that time, that's kind of expensive. That's what I was about to say, and I ain't even lived there. But all must hear this boy pianist. Many were the comments of this boy of such wonderful talents. As I drove over our people home, they seemed to talk of nothing else. They declared that he was indeed a wonder. Okay. Longing for freedom. Look, I need to bring, like, Amuna, you need to bring the book closer. Longing for freedom. Sometimes when the farm hands were at work, peddlers would come along, and as they were treated badly by the rich planters, they hated them and talked to the slaves in a way to excite them and set them to thinking of freedom. And they have a peddler in the movie, if you're watching, it's not a movie, the drama series, Underground. I forgot his name, but they had a peddler, I think like 2 episodes ago. And he was coming through, and he was poor, but, you know, that's when he just said that, it reminded me of him, you know, hawking his wares on a little carriage thing that he's pushing along. And so they're saying that they were kind of like the underclass. You were a carpetbagger. It says, the rich planters hated them and talked to the slaves in a way to excite them and set them thinking of freedom. They would say, encouraging to them, you will be free someday. But the downtrodden slaves, some of whom were bowed with age, with frosted hair and furrowed cheek, would answer, look up from their work. We don't believe that. My grandfather said we was to be free, but we ain't free yet. It had been talked of this freedom from generation to generation. Perhaps they would not have thought of freedom if their owners had not been so cruel. Had my mistress been more kind to me, I should have thought less of liberty. I know the cruel treatment which I received was the main thing that made me wish to be free. I ain't got much comments today. I might just see a lot of face reactions. Like, besides this, it was inhumane to separate families as they did. Think of a mother being sold from all her children, separated for life. This separation was common, and many died heartbroken by reason of it. I cannot forget the cruel separation from my mother. I know not what became of her, but I have always believed her dead many years ago. I guess that's for solace of heart. I think he was, what did he say, 6? I'm getting all the narratives up in my mind all together, but I think he was rather young. See, there I go. See, I'm not that delusional. I was a mere child, probably not more than 6 years of age. There's a whole lot of narratives swimming in my mind, but yeah, he was 6. He was around 6 when it happened to him. Where am I? He imagined his mother dead many years ago. Hundreds were separated as my mother and I were never met again. Though freedom was yearned for by some because the treatment was so bad, others who were bright and looked into the matter knew it was a curse to be held a slave. That's what I'm saying. They longed to stand out in true manhood, allowed to express their opinions as were white men. That's for another day right there. That statement right there. Others still desired freedom, thinking they would or they could then reclaim a wife or a husband or children. The mother would again see her child. All these promptings of the heart made them yearn for freedom. New Year's was always a heart-rending time, for it was then the slaves were bought and sold, and they stood in constant fear of losing someone dear to them, a child, a husband, or a wife. And so we read this one witness here. We read it last week. We read it last week in Weevils in the Wheat. I don't remember exactly who said it, but she said, whatever you're doing for New Year's, this is what you're going to do for the rest of the year. And we read it in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. So we read it 3 times that New Year's Day was hiring out there. Now, there's some meme going around on social media that talks about Black Friday and Thanksgiving being the time when, you know, slaves went on the block. Up until this time, I have not seen that, as we're reading. So this is how we're going to begin to dispel. Oh, Person Kid, greetings. Welcome, Person Kid. Thanks for listening in. Thank you, everybody who's listening in. Definitely. We haven't seen that. So when we see these things on social media, these memes, and it's not substantiated, you cannot believe everything somebody put a picture and some words on. This is firsthand accounts. We have 3 witnesses that says it was New Year's Day that was hiring out day. New Year's Day is when the master would bring you to this field, this fair, and hire you out on a mass scale, and people would pray that they got good masters. We had 3 different witnesses. Like I said, we have Harriet Jacobs, we had Lewis Hughes, and I got to go get the name of the other sister that we read last week who said the same thing. So again, if we're seeing this, we don't believe everything we're reading. I can't imagine to be in constant fear of losing a family member. Closure came from imagining them dead. Yes, indeed, Sister Angel. That's deep. That's deep, because at 6 years old, how you don't even have the reasoning skills to really understand what happened to you. And in the movie, I keep calling it the movie, okay, mini movie, whatever you want to call it. In the drama series, we had the last episode was a man whose wife was sold from under him, and he tracked down this lawyer guy to hold him accountable for being complicit in this act. And so when something tragic happens like that, and he was an adult, so imagine a child at the age of 6 who cannot reason or rationale what just happened, and the fact that he's never going to see her again. He's never going to see. So imagining her dead kind of gives the mind at least some rest, which is kind of wild. So my first break from freedom. Let me make sure here. 1 second. My break from freedom. All right. It says, in the new home, my duties were harder than ever. So big home for master, more work for slave. It says the McGee's held me with tighter grip, and it was nothing but cruel abuse from morning till night. So I made up my mind to try and run away to a free country. I used to hear Boss read sometimes in the paper about runaway slaves who had gone to Canada, and it always made me long to go, yet I never appeared as if I paid the slightest attention to what the family read or said on such matters. But I felt that I could be like others and try at least to get away. One morning when Boss had gone to town, Madame had threatened to whip me and told me to come to the house. When she called me, I did not go, but went off down through the garden, through the woods, and made my way for the city. When I got into Memphis, I found at the landing a boat called the Statesman, and I sneaked aboard. It was not expected that the boat was hit. Like, he didn't have no plan. Charles Ball was over there looking at the sky, he didn't have no plan. He was like, yo, I'm just out, forget this. I'm sorry. When I got into Memphis, I found at the landing, a boat called Statesman, and I sneaked aboard. It was not expected that the boat would stay more than a few hours, but for some reason, it stayed all night. The boat was loaded with sugar, and I hid myself behind 4 hogsheads. I could see both engineers, one each side of me. When night came, I crept out from my hiding place and went forward to search for food and water, for I was thirsty and very hungry. I found the table where the deck's hands had been eating and managed to get a little food left from their meal and some water. This was by no means enough, but I had to be content and went back to my place of concealment. I had been on board the boat 3 days, and on the third night, when I came out to hunt food, the second mate saw me. In a minute, he eyed me over and said, "Why, I have a reward for you." In a second, he had me go upstairs to the captain. This raised a great excitement among the passengers, and in a minute, I was besieged with numerous questions. Some spoke as if they were sorry for me, and said if they had known I was a poor runaway slave, they would have slipped me ashore. The whole boat was in alarm. It seemed to me they were consulting slips of paper. One said, "Yes, he is the same. Listen how it reads. Ran away from Edmund McGee, my mulatto boy Lewis, 5 feet 6 inches in height, black hair, is very bright and intelligent. He will give $500 for him alive, and half of this amount for acknowledge that he has been killed." So they put $500 on his head and $250 if he's not alive. My heart sprang into my mouth when I heard 2 men read this advertisement. I knew at once that it all meant remembering how often I heard boss read such articles from the papers and from handbills that were distributed through the city. The captain asked me if I could dance. It seemed he felt sorry for me, for he said, "That's a bright boy to be a slave." Then turning to me, he said, "Come, give us a dance." I was young and nimble, so I danced a few of the old Southern clog dances and sang out one or two songs like this. "Come along, Sam," the fifer sung. "Ain't you mighty glad your day's work is done?" After I finished their singing and dancing, the captain took up a collection for me and got about $2. This cheered me a good deal. I knew that I would need money if I should ever succeed in getting on. This is very interesting. On the following evening, when we reached West Franklin, Indiana, while the passengers were at tea, another boat pushed into port right after ours. Immediately, a gentleman passenger came to me hurriedly and whispered to me to go downstairs, jump out of the bow of the other boat, and go ashore. I was alarmed but obeyed, for I felt he was a friend to slaves. I went out as quietly as I could and was not missed until I had gotten on shore. Then I heard the alarm give that the boy was gone, that the runaway was gone. But I sped on and did not stop until I had run through the village and had come to a road that led right into the country. I took this road and went on until I had got 4 or 5 miles, when I came to a farmhouse. Before reaching it, however, I met 2 men on horseback on their way to the village. They passed on without specially noticing me, and I kept on my way until reaching the farmhouse. I was so hungry. I went in and asked for food. While I was eating, the men who I had met rode up. They had been to the village, and learning that a runaway slave was wanted and remembered meeting me, they returned in hot haste. They wanted that money, in hope of finding me and securing the reward. They hallooed to the people in the house and an old woman and her daughter, whom they seemed to know, saying, "There is a runaway nigger out who stole off a boat this evening." The old lady said, "Come." Becoming frightened at once, when they came in, they began to question me. I trembled all over, but answered them. They said, "You are the fellow we want who ran off the boat." I was too scared to deny it, so I owned I was on the boat and stole off. They did not tarry long, but taking me with them, they went about a half a mile to their house. They planned and talked all the way, and one said, "We're good for $75 from him anyway." The next morning, they took me to the village. They soon found out that the engineer, by order of the captain, had stayed over to search for me. A lawsuit followed, and I was taken before the magistrate before the engineer could get possession of me. There was a legal course that had to be gone through with. A lawyer, Fox by name, furnished the $75 for the men who had caught me. The part of the case being settled, Fox and the engineer started for Evansville, Indiana. So dude made it all the way from Mississippi to Indiana. I mean, that's a trek. That same night, upon arriving there, Fox received from the captain of the boat the money he had advanced to the men who caught me, and went on arriving at Louisville, Kentucky. The next day, I was then taken again before a magistrate by the captain, when the following statement was read by the official. Captain Montgomery brought forth a boy and said, he is the property of Edmund McGee of Memphis, Tennessee. Come forth, owner, and prove property, for after the boy shall remain in jail 6 months, he shall be sold to pay jail fee. I just want to say at this point before I continue, that as you can see, the whole institution, as I was saying the other day, was complicit. Some people say, I didn't directly own slaves. Okay, but the whole institution, the way the whole system was set, was complicit with slavery. You had people who were capturing the slaves. They didn't own slaves necessarily. They were bounty hunters. You had the printers who were printing, you know, these advertisements in their newspapers. You had the shipping companies who were making the sails and the ropes and the boating ships for the slave journeys. Everybody, whether or not your hand was directly on the pot or by proxy, was complicit with this institution of slavery. And I just think it's so interesting that you want to be so accountable, or what's the word I'm looking for here? The slave master who stole you know, stolen goods and property, and now you are going through all these legal parameters to say that, hey, I rightfully possess this person, when in the first place you possess a person, number one, and secondly, stolen goods. It's just some interesting stuff. That's all I have to say. Mr. McGee was informed of my whereabouts, and it was not long before he and his cousin came to get me. When they came, I was called up by a nickname they had given me, Memphis. Come out here, Memphis, said the turnkey. Your master has come for you. I went downstairs in the office and found boss waiting for me. Hello, Lou, said he. What are you doing here, you dog? I was so frightened I said nothing. Of course, some few words were passed between him and the officers. I heard him say that I was a smart fellow and he could not tell why I had run away, that he had always treated me well. They always say that. Isn't that like, anyway. He doesn't know why he ran away. This was to impress the officers with the idea that he was not unkind to his slaves. The slaveholders all hated to be classed as bad taskmasters, yet nearly all of them were. The clothes I wore were jail property, and he could not take me away in them, so we started to go up to town to get others. As we passed out the jailer, Buck Hannon said, ain't you going to put handcuffs on him? Oh, no, said boss. After I was taken to the store and fitted with new suit of clothes, he brought me back to the jail where I was washed myself and put on the new garments. When all was complete and I seemed to suit master's fastidious eye, he took me to the Gold House where he was stopping. In the evening, we started for home and reached Memphis the following day. Boss did not flog me as I expected, but sent me to my regular routine work. He had been in this new house so short a time, he did not want it to be rumored that he whipped slaves. So it's all for show, right? He was so stylish and rich, but the madame was filled with rage, right? Although she did not say much, I think they saw that I was no longer a child. They feared I would go again. But after I had been home some 3 or 4 weeks, Madame Sarah commenced her old tricks, attempting to whip me, box my jaws, and pinch me. And any little thing was not pleasing to her at mealtime. It was a special delight for her to reach out when I drew near to her to pass something and give me a blow with her hand. Truly, it was a monstrous domestic institution that not only tolerated but fostered such an exhibition of table manners by a would-be fine lady, such vulgar spite and cruelty. So at dinner time or meal time, this woman is pinching his ears and boxing him in the face, and you know, you can imagine saying all kind of different nasty words to him. But I find it interesting. He says, truly, it was a monstrous domestic institution that not only tolerated but fostered such an exhibition of table manners by a would-be fine lady. This is what I keep saying. It's domestic. It was a level of domestic abuse. This whole institution of slavery, where it is the child, the dependent, the slave was abused. And because they had no rights, what did they do? They ran off, or they ran away to be able to escape. So this is just very interesting way of looking at it. And he just kind of, I'm going to have to outline that right now, because he echo the sentiments that I have concluded while listening to this. And I say that not just for labeling it domestic abuse, but to also realize that if they have done so much study on domestic abuse, domestic violence. And so if we study that modality of what it takes to heal the relationship or the trauma that has been done, not necessarily the relationship, because the Europeans oftentimes, not all, but a good amount, don't even want to admit, the same way in which that the Black people don't want to admit how slavery has affected them. You know, we think that this is just how we are. This is all what we're reading coming from this experience passed down through generation to generation. So I'm going to go ahead and read. Time is at 10:11. I'm going to go ahead and read some more here. Let me check and make sure we don't have any comments that I may be missing. All right. All right. My second runaway trip. So now he got runaway fever. By the way, this is a real life, look it up. Samuel Cartwright is his name. And I don't know if I said it before, but Samuel Cartwright, let me see if I can look it up for you right now. This will be a little, we're going to take a field trip here. Give me a minute. We're going to look it up and we're going to look at it together in this field trip. I like field trips. You like field trips? Let's take a field trip. So we're going to look up Samuel Cartwright is his name. I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. Right. Now, he said this is his second runaway trip, right? So let's take a little trip over here to Wikipedia. You can substantiate other places outside of Wikipedia, of course, but I'm going to share my screen right now with you, right? Tell me if you see it. Hold on one second. I got a lot of things open because, like I said, I'm doing a lot of work here, but let me, oh, here we go. Hopefully you're seeing my screen here. All right. You're seeing my screen, right? So Samuel Cartwright, this dude right here in the corner, American physician from 1793 to 1863. Now, he would call what is happening now, he made up a name and named it drapetomania. Drapetomania, right? And what in the world was drapetomania? This is what he was walking around telling slave masters. Now we see Lou right now, Lewis, he has caught a spell of drapetomania. It was supposed mental illness described by American physician Samuel A. Cartwright in 1851 that caused Black slaves to flee captivity. Okay, so you're mentally ill because you want to leave. In this situation, he's telling you he's domestically abused, he's ill-treated, and this is why he's escaping this treatment. But in Samuel Cartwright's narrative, you're mentally ill as a slave, and this is why you want to leave your nice, gentle, kind masters. It says, today, drapetomania is considered an example of pseudoscience and part of edifice of scientific racism. The term derived from the Greek draptis, a runaway or runaway slave with mania, madness, and frenzy. In Diseases and Peculiarities of the Negro Race, Cartwright points out that the Bible calls for a slave to be submissive to his master, and by doing so, the slave will have no desire to run away. Well, he only quoted half of as usual, but let's continue. It says, if the white man attempts to oppose the deity's will by trying to make the Negro anything else than the submissive knee bender, which the Almighty declared he should be, by trying to raise him to a level with himself, or by putting himself on any equality with the Negro, or if he abuses the power which God has given him over his fellow man by being cruel to him or punishing him in anger, or by neglecting to protect him from wanting abuses of his fellow servants and all other, or by denying him the usual comforts and necessities of life, the Negro will run away. But if he keeps him in the position that will learn from the scriptures he was intended to occupy, that is the position of submission, and if his master or overseer be kind and gracious in his hearing towards him without condescension, condescension, sorry, and at the same time minister to his physical wants and protects him from abuses, the Negro is spellbound and cannot run away. So in Cartwright's narrative, the Negro, or the so-called Negro's natural position, is a knee bender, okay, submissive to the European, right? And if the European treats him like a good slave master and gives him all these things and don't be cruel to him, he will be spellbound and not want to run away. And it says Cartwright described this disorder, which he said was unknown to other medical authorities. So he discovered this, although its diagnostic symptom, the absconding from service, is well known to other planters and overseers. And he wrote this in medical papers. In a paper delivered before the Medical Association of Louisiana that was widely reprinted, he stated that malady was a consequence of masters who made themselves too familiar with slaves, treating them as equals. And you could definitely go on. No, I don't want to skip this part. And then I'm going to come back to what it appears that Lewis Hughes, according to Samuel Cartwright and his pseudoscience, had drapetomania. It says prevention and remedy. In addition to identifying drapetomania, Cartwright prescribed a remedy. His feeling was that with proper medical advice strictly followed, this troublesome practice that many Negroes have of running away can be almost entirely prevented. In the case of slaves sulky and dissatisfied without cause, okay, so the cause is not that you're oppressed or that you're a slave or that someone owns you. So this is we have to look into the mind of the European. They're telling us their mind right now, which I think, I think anyway, is very important. So it's not that you desire to be a free individual like everyone else. It's that you don't really have a reason to be sulky and dissatisfied. That you don't have a cause. Being a slave is not a cause to be sulky and dissatisfied. It says a warning sign of imminent flight. Cartwright prescribed whipping the devil out of them, end quote, as a quote preventative measure. As a remedy for this quote unquote disease or mental disease, doctors also made running a physical impossibility by prescribing the removal of both big toes. Yeah, just so you know that I'm not making that up. Now let's reconvene. At which point it would have been thought, I'm trying to open this back up here. It would have been thought that hopefully you were able to see that. I was reading, if not you were able to see it, you were able to hear it, that in yes, drapetomania diatis athapiaspis. Yeah, it was some kind of crazy name. Tendency to remain too African. Yeah, tendency to want to be free. You understand? Tendency to not want me to pimp you out and you to be my slave. Wild and crazy. That's the thought process. You have to tell yourself, that's that cognitive dissonance. You have to separate yourself from the reality of what's going on to appease your conscience for you to be able to continue doing what you're doing. And we do it in small ways, but this is where a nation of people was experiencing this dissonance. They had to make you less than a person, less than a human being. Wow. And the fact that you wanted to run away, apparently you have some kind of mental illness, because we're the best. And why would you want to run away from us? I'm just saying. My second runaway trip. About 3 months after my first attempt to get away, I thought I would try it again. See, dude got drapetomania. I went to Memphis and saw a boat at the landing called the John Learsey, a Cincinnati packet. The boat carried the mail. She had come into port in the morning and was being uploaded or unloaded. I went aboard in the afternoon and jumped down into the hull. Boss had been there in the forepart of the afternoon inquiring for me, but I did not know it then. After I had been in the boat some time, the men commenced loading it. I crept up in the corner and hid myself. At first, 200 or 300 dry and green hides were thrown in, and these hid me. But later on, 2 or 3 tiers of cotton bales were put in the center of the hull, and when the boat started, I got upon the top of these and lay there. I could hear the people talking above me, but it was so dark I could not see anything. It was dark as a dungeon. I had lain there 2 nights and began to get so weak and faint I could stand it no longer. For some reason, the boat did not start the day I went aboard. Consequently, I had not gotten as far from home as I expected, and my provisions had largely been in vain. Despairing hunger and hungry, on the third day I commenced howling and screaming, hoping that someone would hear me and come to my relief. For almost anything else would have been more preferable to the privation and hunger from which I was suffering. But I could make no one hear, at least no one paid any attention to my screams, if they did hear. In the evening, however, one of the deck hands came in with a lantern to look around and see everything was all right. I saw the light and followed him out, but I had been out of my hiding only a short time when I was discovered by a man who took me upstairs to the captain. It was an effort for me to walk upstairs, as I was weak and faint, having neither eaten nor drank anything for 3 days. This boat was crowded with passengers, and it was soon a scene of confusion. I was placed into the pilot's room for safety until we arrived at a small town in Kentucky called Monroe. I was put off here to be kept until the packet came back from Cincinnati. Then I was carried back to Memphis, arriving about 1 o'clock at night, and for safekeeping was put into what was called the calaboose. This was especially for keeping of slaves who had run away and been caught. Yo, they actually made a special spot. They made a special spot because this was such an often occurrence for slaves who ran away and had been caught. Word was sent to boss of my capture, and the next morning Thomas Bland, a fellow servant of mine, was sent to take me home. I cannot tell how I felt, for the only thought that came to me was that I should get killed. The madame met us as we drove into the yard. "Aye," she said to me, "you put up the wrong hotel, sir." I was taken to the barn where stocks had been prepared, beside which were a cowhide and a pail of salt water, all prepared for me. It was terrible, but there was no escape. I was fastened in the stocks and my clothes removed. Then the whipping began. Boss whipped me a while, then he sat down and read his paper, after which the whipping was resumed. This continued for 2 hours. Fastened as I was in the stocks, I could only stand and take lash after lash as long as he desired, the terrible rawhide cutting into my flesh at every stroke. Then he used peach tree switch, which cracked the flesh so the blood oozed out. After this came the paddle, 2.5 feet long, 3 inches wide. Salt water was once applied to wash the wounds, and the smartening was maddening. This torture was common among the Southern planters. God only knows what I suffered under it all, and he alone gave me strength to endure it. I could hardly move after the terrible ordeal was finished, and could scarcely bear my clothes to touch me at first. So sore was my whole body, and it was weeks before I was myself again. And so there we go again. This is as Cartwright prescribed. Hold on 1 second. Whippings and all the things of this nature. I see. I'm trying to get back to the. There we go. Like clipping the wings of a caged bird. Correct. You want to contain them, discourage them from you know, sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yeah, and so this is the discouragement to keep you in this institution where, you know, you wouldn't wish on anybody, but they had to use terror and fear and, you know, terrorizing the individual both mentally and physically to keep them on the job. So they expended, these Europeans who were so complicit in this institution, expended a lot of energy. And this is something for us to understand as we seem not to get what's going on. They expended a lot of energy into this terrorizing, into this fear, into this bullying, into this manipulation. It's physical energy. They expended monies to try to keep you enslaved. They put special things on the boat. They had to get all of these, you know, there was a whole system of terror. And it's funny today how you know, in this, especially this country, it cries a lot about this person is terrorizing and that person is terrorizing. But the very, as they call it, I didn't call it that, they call it the original sin of America was based, and not only America, the West, the Caribbean, South America, North America, and the Caribbean, is based on this system of terrorism in which to exact labor out of someone without any compensation. Now, we understand, what I understand, where I'm coming from, some of why or how universally we as a people got into this position, because there's just weights and balances in the universe. You understand? And so this, for I think for a lot of our people, without getting to the how we got in this position or why, and at least owning that portion, the wicked can't rule over the righteous. And something along our journey went awry that put us in an open position. It's like your immune system. I'll say like it's your immune system. You don't get a cold unless your immune system is down. You don't contract certain sicknesses unless your immune system is down, unless there's an opening somewhere that's going to allow this sickness or this illness or this plague to come in. If you're fully protected, then this plague can exist outside, but it will not come nigh you. It will not come inside your dwelling. So this kind of immunity, spiritual immunity, if there's an opening anywhere, it doesn't have to, then these type of energies will be able to permeate. It's the same thing like if you don't have a desire to go to the club, they can send you 50 million club flyers. They could tell you this person is going to be there. You're not going because there's no opening. You understand? There's no opening in the mind. There's no desire towards that thing. So you're not going to go in that direction. Slavery is a very interesting, although as many would say throughout history, it existed in all different societies. But this particular slavery that we're reading about, where your very culture, your very language, your very essence of your being is stripped from you, is what makes it like totally out of this world. So I am going to read one more, Preaching to the Slaves. I said preaching to the slaves. I didn't even look before I read, but preaching to the slaves. Let's read it. As an offset probably to such diabolical cruelties as those which were practiced upon me in common with nearly all the slaves in the cotton region of the South, it was the custom in the section of the country where I lived to have the white minister preach to the servants Sunday afternoon after the morning service for the whites. The white people hired the minister by the year to preach for them at their church. Then he had to preach to each master's slaves in turn. The circuit was made once a month, but there was service of some kind every Sunday. The slaves on some places gathered in the yard, at others in the white folks' schoolhouses, and they all seemed pleased and eager to hear the word of God. I have to say it like how they be saying it, right? It was strong evidence of their native intelligence, native intelligence and discrimination that they could discern the difference between the truths of the word, he put it in quotation, and the professed practices of those truths by their masters. My boss took pride in having all his slaves look clean and tidy at the Sabbath service. But how would he have liked to have the slave which back lacerated with the lash appear in those assemblies with their wounds uncovered? The question can never be answered. The master and most of his victims have gone where professions of righteousness will not avail to cover the barbarities practiced here. So Lewis is getting turned up. Like he said, he growing into a man, wherever it is now, he's realizing just being your pet and walking around and doing what you want me to do is not going to get it. And he said, well, would you like me to come to church with my bare back so you could show your parishioners what you've been doing? Very, very interesting. When we pick it up, we will read A Family of Free Persons Sold into Slavery. That it will be our next chapter that we're going to read. I want to thank you so much for sticking with us. I was juggling juggling for a minute there, still juggling, but kind of whittled down. Wednesdays, as you know, is Underground. I think they got like 4 more episodes. If you missed it, go to WGN Underground, and they have the past episodes up so you can get caught up. And we would love to hear what you think, how it's measuring up with what we're reading. Right now, he's in Kentucky. And one of the interesting things about that series is that it was shot in a real plantation, a real old Louisiana plantation house where slaves really were. So I heard the interview on NPR radio, and they were talking about the feeling that they felt of being in that location and how spiritual it was to be in the very place that these things happened in this particular Louisiana plantation. So if I find that interview again, I will share it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Definitely stay tuned, share the information. Let us know how you are receiving on this LED project. And if you want to read, I always say that. I like reading, but if you would like to read, if you would like to lend your voice, this is also online as well. And the link is in the box. So definitely you don't necessarily have to buy the book. You can read it offline and we could invite you to the Google Hangout and hear your voice. So until next time, my name is Amuna Yisrael. As you see, my eyes are getting small. That means I'm getting sleepy. So until next time, everybody have a blessed night. Shalom.